So welcome everyone. I'm Josh Safty, principal at KMA and co-chair of the Access Committee. I'm joined by my co-chair, Ian Baldwin, and the co-chairs of the Codes Committee, Andy Collard, Drake Jacobs, who I can see, and I don't know, sorry, I have to scroll all the way through, but we have put together this presentation as a joint meeting of the two committees, which we do, I'd say, more or less once a year. There's obviously a lot of overlap between the Codes Committee and the Access Committee, the intersection of that Venn diagram being accessibility codes. So I'm happy to introduce Lisa Pillars. Lisa is an associate principal in our office and primarily responsible for all of KMA's consulting work in multifamily housing, both market rate and affordable, although the majority of Lisa's work is in market rate. Lisa actually predates me at KMA. She worked previously for my partners, Katie McGinnis and David Kessler, but has been with KMA for 10 years or so. Is a graduate of the Boston Architectural College, where I was happy to teach during some of the time that I think you were a student, Lisa. We overlapped. But so Lisa is really, for me and for KMA staff, the person that we turn to more than anybody else for guidance on code compliance as it relates to multifamily housing. And as advertised today, she's been sitting on a national committee as part of the ICC ANSI rulemaking efforts and updates to the year model codes. And so she's kind of abreast of new things that are happening, and she's going to be talking about two things primarily: the adoption of the 27 ANSI standard, which is the first time that there have been what we would consider significant changes to some of the dimensional and scoping requirements, and then also an announcement by HUD that they would be adopting new model codes as safe harbors for compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So Lisa, I hope I didn't just take your first two slides.
Half an hour's gone now. No. So, yeah, I'll just repeat.
I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add about me. That's just me. I am, thank you first of all for inviting me and giving us this opportunity to talk about these two new changes, because they're pretty significant in the accessibility world. I do want to say that Zoom is obviously awkward, although I am coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia right now. Please, either put the questions through the chat room, and Ian or Josh, you can let me know what they are, or unmute and ask away. I'd like it to be as interactive as we can. I guess one of the first things to note is these are two really significant changes happening in the accessibility and building and codes world. As you know, the model codes change every 3 years, and so does the accessibility standards. And some years are not much, but some years are quite significant. So that's the reason for the 2017 discussion. And also that the adoption of the 2009 as a safe harbor now it will have a huge impact on particularly multifamily housing going forward. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time on that as well. Let's see. So as you know, the building 2017 is a standard intent to meet the building code specifically. 2009 that we'll talk about with HUD meets building code requirements, but also meets the Fair Housing, will now be meeting the Fair Housing Act, which is the civil rights law piece of building. So they're slightly different in that sense. So anyway, I thought we could start with ANSI 2017 first. I am curious to know of the people out here, neither of these discussions are particularly related to building in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts has its own quirks. And I'm not 100% sure how using one of the new HUD safe harbors will be beneficial yet. So are there people that are doing projects outside of Massachusetts? That would be helpful to know, I guess. Okay, as long as there's some, that's great. So ANSI is specific for meeting the building code. And I think some of the, oh, now I can't see my own slides. All right, see, Zoom, can't see my writing. So 2017 is used to meet the technical requirements. Traditionally, the building code above that, like 2018, normally adopts the newest ANSI. When 2018 was adopted, that model code did not take on 2017 as the reference code for meeting the technical requirements. So that is some of the reason I believe we're seeing the lag in it being used. Currently, that we're aware of, South Carolina is the only state that has adopted and modified their building code to include, to require, not just include, require 2017. We also are finding some jurisdictions, for example, one is Lebanon, Tennessee. We are currently working on projects in both of these areas. We have 3 or 4 in South Carolina right now and 1 in Lebanon. I'd be surprised if we had 2 in Lebanon, but 1. Anyway, okay. One of the reasons that there's some significant changes with this adoption is I think the driving force has been the use of more powered devices, wheelchairs, scooters, all that. They're much larger. When the codes were originally, and the standards were originally developed many years ago, back in the 60s and 70s, they were based on manual wheelchairs. And more users are using powered devices. And so finally, the codes are catching up, and space, and what we'll talk about is the dimensions are getting larger. And the requirements for those. They've also made a difference in trying to align with the ADA. And even though the rights of way are guidelines still only, many of the exterior conditions you'll see much more lined up with the ADA guidelines around exterior conditions like curb cuts and accessible routes. And it now aligns more with the fair housing again when we get to the units and the dwelling units parts. The dwelling unit parts, you'll see it much more lined up with the Fair Housing Act requirements. In trying to mirror at least and be consistent with the ADA, you'll notice chapters 10 and 11 have been switched. 10 is now back to recreational, and 11 is all the dwelling units. So I thought we could define the differences as I cannot see my own slide, as what's new and modifications. This is, sorry, sorry about that. Okay. I can't see the headings to my slides, so I apologize. One of the downfalls of Zoom. I think I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the, actually, what has changed. There's been there was always an occasional exception to existing buildings, but now many of the sections have very clear differential requirements for existing building and new construction, and they've taken the time to actually define what they view as existing buildings. There's now acoustical standards for classrooms, very detailed on that. There are now requirements for and where to be located, the charging stations for wheelchairs, for power devices. There is electric vehicle charging station information. We've all been guessing at it for years, but now we finally have some technical requirements for that. There's accessible routes through parking lots. That's a brand new item in there. It's now very much aligned with HUD requirements. We'll talk about that. So any of the ones in bold, we're going to have some additional slides to talk about. There's now information for gaming rooms, water bottle filling stations. There's now a new section for 90-degree turns that has never been in the codes before in the standards. So that's a new piece. It's quite detailed, so I haven't actually got a lot put in this presentation for that. Parallel street parking. Again, there's only been guidance prior to this. Now we have actual technical requirements. Accessible, there is now a new accessible toilet stall alternative. So I thought we could look at that. There are now requirements for sign language interpreter stations and recreational spaces, and have had a few additional components to them. And now there's requirements for beds under accessibility, so under accessible units. And those are the units that, of course, apply to senior living, dorms, and hotels. And then these are some of the clarifications and the modifications that are quite significant in the different sections. For the first time, we've got some new language now with construction tolerances, clarifying and making it a little more understandable about how you can apply construction tolerances. Still, Massachusetts is the only code that defines the actual what's acceptable for dimensions. They've added scoping language for rounding down. Massachusetts has always had that in 521 CMR, but it is not true of model building codes. There's just sometimes an understanding, but it hasn't really been spelled out before. So now there's an actual chart to kind of follow along about how to do the rounding down. Probably the one everyone's most familiar with is the turning spaces, and the T-turns have increased in size. These are model building blocks, so they have an impact on many other sections within the code. So we'll talk about that. Clear floor space has increased, again, to account for the sizing of power devices. So we'll see that's also a building block. We'll see how that plays out in the different sections of the code. We'll talk about that further. Operable parts, there's quite a bit that's changed with operable parts. It's very nuanced, and that would take another training day. So I've not got that included except in one area, but you'll see it's well worth reading through that section to see how that plays out. Clear width of accessible routes has increased now for exterior spaces. Again, in Massachusetts, and if you ever build in North Carolina, that's already, we've been doing that for years, but this is new now. So you'll see that in the other, states that you're working in, like Rhode Island, and if once this is adopted there, Connecticut and all these other places. Door maneuvering clearance, there's a couple of instances where that has changed due to the increase. Curb ramps are now being identified a little more clearly in this version. Again, very much based on the ADA and PROAG. And so we'll take a look at those very briefly. Parking and passenger loading spaces have changed. You'll see at least a clip on this slide about it. I've not gone into detail, but sizes are bigger. In general, that's the takeaway from this. Most sizes are bigger. So clear floor space has changed, both the requirements for it, and again, the clear floor space size is different. And you'll see about that. It's changed how we view the centering of it on an appliance. There are some shower modifications. There's now modifications for accessible signage in stairs and at exits. Benches are now much more lined up. It will be stricter now for people who are used to dealing with ANSI codes. It's aligned with the ADA. There's no longer choices. It's really providing a perpendicular space to the benches, to the short side of the bench. And then we'll do a few slides at the end on the different unit types and the high points and the highlights of what has changed for an accessible unit, a type A unit, and a type B unit. I think something to think about, and I'd be very interested to hear if anybody's been using this or as you're learning about the changes. I think these are just a very short slide to talk about how things will start to change in the design world based on these changes. So we now have larger clear floor space and turning space. So how is that going to impact the designs that we're all making? You'll start to see the need for larger shower clearances. So will that mean that the bathrooms will start to get bigger? Will the hotel rooms those units be bigger? The larger spaces now needed to accommodate a parallel approach at transaction counters. So again, that lobby desk, the transaction counter at the hotel, all that kind of thing will start to come into play. The exterior accessible route, I think you'll see that change happen in parking garages as we start to accommodate the need for wider walkways, combined with the added needing in a separated route. So we're seeing some things that will, I think in general, just start to create the need for larger spaces. And this new accessibility route with the 90-degree turn requirements, I think that may have an impact in restaurant and dining room areas, multi-user toilet rooms, locker rooms, places where you have these tight turning to get in and out of them, corridor layouts where you have passing space. So it'll be interesting to see, the impact on this. So let's go in a little more depth about the new changes out of that list that we just talked about. So first of all, there's now a requirement for when you are providing wheelchair charging stations, these bulleted points that you'll see in the slides coming up. These are sort of the basic requirements needed. Where they'll have an impact is right now, as of this writing, hotel guest rooms and senior living units and dorm rooms, anything that requires a true accessible unit to be provided under the codes, under the Chapter 11 codes, that's where you'll need to provide one and then make sure that it meets these requirements, having a duplex outlet, clear floor space, and within accessible reach range. It's not required yet in assembly seating, but when you provide it in there, then you'll need to meet these requirements. So think about places where a user might be for a long time, like at a theater and anything like that. So that's where they're sort of letting you know that, similar to an EV charging station, no, there aren't requirements usually yet to provide electric charging. Some zoning has it, but once you provide it, you have to meet these requirements.
There's a question in the chat, and this is a chance to just clarify, I guess. The question is, does it apply to group 2 units?
No, so this is primarily ANSI codes. So Massachusetts, I guess I should have started with this. Massachusetts, this is for mostly projects outside of Massachusetts, because we have our own building code 521 CMR that dictates the requirements around dwelling units. So this will be for anything that is under an ANSI code that has adopted 2017 as part of their building code. So it does not apply yet that we know of to Massachusetts. Thank you. Electric vehicle charging stations, again, they're not required to be provided anywhere, but once you provide them, these are the actual requirements to have operable parts, to have an accessible route, reach range. I think sometimes projects do get confused and put an accessible EV charging station in their places, and that's completely acceptable. The thing to watch out for is that it doesn't reduce your minimum number that's required for some other use, like your residential count, your minimum count to meet in a hotel, anything else that's minimum, it takes away from that. It would become its own dedicated if you're a developer or you want to add an accessible EV. A lot of projects do get confused with that, and they end up reducing their parking count by accident. And this is a brand new project, hot off the press slide from last week, by the way. Parallel and street parking has changed, not changed, but has been added to actually beyond guidance now. These are the technical requirements. What drives it is the size of the sidewalk next to it. And again, I should pause for a minute and just encourage everybody who thinks they're going to be using 2017 to really read through the code book. This is just intended as an overview and a highlight of the codes. Definitely should have started with that. But anyway, these are some of the requirements. If you're in an alteration, you're not required to have some things in place, but there are location requirements So it will be interesting to see how this plays out. Putting a location at the end of a block. And the reason for that is so you can access the curb cut to get out. So let's see. Angled parking has changed. The access aisles used to be, there used to need to be a requirement to put them on both sides, I believe. Now it's, you can share a space in angled parking, but the minimum does have to be 96 inches. So even if two spaces are standard spaces, and normally you'd be permitted to have 60, it is now 96 in an angled parking only to accommodate getting out of the car and getting to the accessible route. I think one of the biggest changes, again, for parking is now a requirement for an accessible route through parking areas. This aligns very much with HUD. That's always been a requirement in fair housing under the HUD guidelines. The intent is for keeping people safe. Whenever there's crossing and being adjacent to vehicular routes, it's been important to separate out the pedestrian accessible route. Typically it's done with striping, but there's a couple of exceptions to it. Of course, you don't need to provide it at a drive aisle and accessible spaces at passenger loading zones, but otherwise there does need to be some separation. I think the impact again is that you'll start to see larger, possibly garages, because you'll have your vehicular route requirement and the accessible route, which is minimum 36 inside and interior space. And the parking lots, again, we're now dealing with a 48-inch accessible route. So I'll be curious to see how this, plays out, especially in parking garages. I think similar to the ADA, though, there is not a requirement to provide this path behind the parking space. It's understood there, and you can see that when you open up and look through 2017.
Lisa, you mentioned HUD there for a second. I just wanted to come in because there was a question from David Polak,
Okay.
Who was referring back to group 2, but it sounds like it's maybe a larger question. Is A117.1 2017 going to be generally required in all HUD subsidized public housing?
No, not at all. Right now, HUD, well, this gets complicated, but to meet the design and construction requirements for fair housing, you can choose a sanctioned safe harbor, which is what we're going to talk about, the new one at the end, or a developer and an architect, a designer has always had a choice to pick any standard. You just run the risk of needing to defend it and make sure it does meet all the requirements of fair housing. So most projects only tend to use one of the sanctioned safe harbors. There used to be 10, it's now increased to 14 or 15 as of last week. So it's not a requirement. This is a requirement once 2017 is a requirement where it's been adopted. The reference back to HUD, though, is this accessible route by vehicular routes has always been in place for fair housing. Does that help answer the question?
And Lisa, this is Josh, maybe just by way of framing this, the federal requirements for public, for federal financially assisted public housing are still going to be the same, which is UFAS and the FHA for new construction, right?
Correct.
The discussion around ANSI is a subset of the discussion around state building code.
Correct.
All states but Massachusetts have adopted a version of ICC and brought the version of ANSI that comes with that version of ICC in as their state accessibility code.
Correct.
But that, of course, has nothing to do with federal financial assistance or any federal regulations. That's just the state building code in the state where you're working.
Correct. Well said.
Thank you.
No, thanks for the summary. Yes. Okay. Great. All right. This is brand new. There's an alternate layout now for, there's the traditional one is still in place, but there's an alternate now. The reason for this is to be able to swing the door in some situations, to also provide that 30 by 52 inch accessibility, clear floor space adjacent as an easier method for transferring to use the toilet. So there's an alternate stall type up there. So those were some of the new things added. There's more, but those were some of the highlights. I thought we could talk a little bit more now about the changes, the modifications that have been made to the existing things that are already in place. So turning space is already in place in the ANSI codes. Now they've changed it and increased the size. So we now have a 67 inch in new construction. There's also now, for a first time, limitations on the amount of space you can share with another clearance. So for example, often turning space is required in a bathroom, and so is clear floor, knee and toe clearance under a lavatory. You used to be able to put the turning space, there was no limitation by the codes, by the standards for that space. So now they've put some very clear requirements of how much you can go under that and share that space. We all know in Massachusetts, you can't share that, it's outside of that. But if you have been building and designing in other states, you pretty much had carte blanche to put the whole circle underneath, which again, didn't make sense. You know, there's pipes under there, but there actually wasn't any restrictions on it. So now there's some additional restrictions to pay attention to. In a very similar way, T-turns, turning space in if you can't, another solution to providing a turning space was a T-turn. It's gotten very complicated under this code. There's now 3 options, and in most cases they're larger. In all cases, they're larger in some way than the original T-turn, either by width or by the arms being larger. The bottom block in green is showing a new plan, new kitchen layout where the architect has started to use and incorporate one of the options. Similar to the turning circle, there's restrictions on the amount of overlap that can be used under the space. I think an impact to pay attention to is base cabinet. So if you are designing kitchens or bathrooms and need that T-turn, there was always an understanding that you needed a minimum 36-inch base cabinet. Well, if you're using option 3, you definitely need a larger than 36-inch base cabinet. So that's something to be aware of, where these T-turns are being used and how it might impact the other elements in the area, like speccing your base cabinets then.
Lisa, sorry to interrupt again. Could you
No,
go back
please.
to the slide with the new alternate toilet stall? There's a question in the chat that says that new bath stall was only 60 wide. How does that work?
So they haven't changed, they changed the length of it primarily to account for the being able to put a 30 by 52 inch space adjacent to the toilet. And that's my understanding for the reason for the length of it. Normally, again, not coming from Massachusetts, Massachusetts already had longer toilet stalls. So again, think about projects where you are not in Massachusetts. I don't know if that has the impact. Toilet stalls have a maximum depth under the ADA and other ANSI codes, previous ANSI codes, to be, depending on whether you have a wall-mounted or floor-mounted toilet, 56 or 59 inches deep. So now they're expanding that to 84 to account for clear floor space to be provided next to the toilet.
Sorry, when I said how does that work, I meant with that 67-inch turnaround when you've got a 60-inch bathroom stall. I was wondering how those two things interact.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry, it was hard to hear.
Sorry, I was saying with the 67-inch turnaround and the 60-inch bathroom stall, how do those two things interact?
So the turning space, so again, this is meant to be just for a toilet compartment, not a toilet room. So you can provide the turning space outside in the larger multi-user toilet room. It does not have to be provided within the stall itself. So these are for should have been clear, these are toilet stalls. So the image is just showing you the one, but this is obviously in a multi-user toilet room versus a toilet compartment that also has the lavatory in it.
Thank you.
Does that answer? Okay. Good question, though. Okay. Anything on T-turns? Although there's one more, I'm sorry. So in existing buildings, we still have the use of what we're all familiar with for T-turns. This is, and that's pretty traditional in this 2017 version, that in existing buildings, you're permitted to basically revert to what you're used to, what has been in all the ANSI codes up to this point, and it's new construction where the newer, larger sizes are coming into play. I think this is also one of the biggest significant changes is the increase. I've been making reference to it throughout this, but the increase in the clear floor space, it has changed by 6 inches, which on one hand doesn't sound like much, but on the other hand, we all know spaces are tight. So it will have a big impact. So this building block, you will see referenced in many areas throughout the codes. So I think the impact to pay attention to is private residential elevators, door maneuvering clearance, which we'll have another slide for, transfer shower clearances. That's got to get bigger. Assembly seating in schools, in theaters. The wheelchair space is now longer, so that's going to have that domino effect on seats, rows of seats. Drinking fountains, again, the impact for, you know, how to provide that if it's a tight space. Pool lifts, you have clearances at the decks, and if your decks are interior, you know, your size is limited. So basically everything's growing. Here's the door maneuvering clearance, and one of the instances it has changed. So that 52-inch growth is there. So in new buildings, you have to make sure you have that full clearance to accommodate a push side. Curb cuts. These next few slides are where things have changed. They've done a more thorough job of defining the curb cuts very differently and clarifying them. One of the biggest changes, though, in general to the curb cuts is the landing. Again, for people who are used to designing in some other areas, Massachusetts included, we've already had that as a requirement, 48-inch for outside spaces. North Carolina has already had that. So in those areas, you're already doing it, but this will be new for once states that you're used to working in maybe adopt 2017, this will become a newer element to your curb cuts. Sorry, I have to keep moving this around. The parallel curb cuts are similar. There's a requirement for the landings, again, to be wider. I think traditionally it's been 36 inches. So we also now have, again, a blended transition acknowledgement. What's new on this is a little bit about the where it can be located, how to locate it, how to make the grade breaks work. Again, I think we've seen more of that in Massachusetts. So those of you designing here and in other states are a little more familiar with this, but this is newer and a modification for how it's being identified for the technical requirements. It's lining up again much more with ADA and the PROAG, if anybody uses that. Another big change is to toilet partition walls. So when you have a side partition in a toilet, you have to make sure now that that spacing is higher. I put a clip in there of a toilet room with full partition walls because I think there's sometimes it's important to remember that if you do full partition walls, instead of traditional ones, that there are minimum depth requirements so that you don't have to cut that wall and put these minimum toe and knee clearance requirements. But the changes are getting deeper. So again, just to be aware when you're specing toilet partitions or specing the height of where to locate them, that's all changing in this new rendition of ANSI. Clear floor space is changing. They have taken away the requirement when you only are providing parallel approach. You're no longer required to center it on the sink. That was always been a requirement. So there's 3 exceptions for providing a parallel approach. Otherwise, you do need a forward approach. But when you have a kitchen where there's no cooktop, where you are using sinks, with children that are under the age of 5, or where it's just a wet bar, there you can provide a parallel approach. And now when you are allowed to provide a parallel approach, it no longer needs to be centered on the sink. So that's a very big change. And here's the shower clearances. Again, due to the building block of the clear floor space being larger, they've given 2 ways to meet this in a transfer shower. So you can see it either lines up traditionally on the control wall, or they're allowing up to 4 inches to go beyond the control wall to fit that space in and still have a safe way to access, transfer, onto the shower seat. And again, in existing buildings, you're permitted to keep that traditional clear floor space. You'll see in a future slide, you're also allowed in a type B unit when you're doing multifamily to keep the old 30 by 40, 36 for a transfer shower, but the old 30 by 48 space. Grab bars, there's new requirements in showers for the grab bars. And so I don't want to always read all the slides to you, but I think they've just modified them so they're not over. I think they didn't have a clear end before of where you could, they'd overlap the seat, sometimes the shower seat. And if it's a fold up shower seat, you can't fold it up because you bang into the grab bar. So I think there's some understanding of that. And the vertical grab bar they've added, similar to tubs in multifamily, there's always been the need for a vertical grab bar blocking. And now the requirement is for a vertical grab bar at showers. It'll be on the wall opposite where the seat is.
Lisa, just a quick question. Sorry on that. Well, this slide too. The that little crosshatched box that's right above the grab bar. What is that?
That's showing you the location for where the controls go.
Oh, the controls. I'm sorry.
Yes. Sorry. Did I not? Is that on the
No,
next
I
Nope. Yeah.
Sorry.
So some of the slides overlap. They show both controls and the grab bar. So that's making reference to the next slide. So handheld shower controls and controls have changed a little bit as well. They've basically gotten more stringent in the alternate roll-in shower for those of you that might design that at times. And it used to be you could be on either side. Now they only are allowing it on the outer side, as you can see from these sections. And the same for the side approach. So in the alternate showers, they've tightened things up a little bit for where you can locate the controls. And so I thought we'd take the last couple of slides and talk about what's changed for the 3 different types of units needed on projects. So chapter 11, again, in this version of the code is now where you'll find the technical requirements for the 3 different types of dwelling units. 1102 refers to accessible units. Those are the most stringent units. You find them in hotels, dormitories, long-term care, like nursing home, senior living. And so there's been some changes. Section 1103 refers to the type A units, primarily for multifamily projects, and the same for the type B. So we'll do three last slides on that before we jump into the HUD stuff. So there's now bed height requirements. So the reason for that is many beds are getting plushier and fuller and high, and it's been too hard to transfer onto the bed. So in the mobility accessible units and in senior living and dormitories that have in the mobility rooms for the dormitories, the beds are dictated by height now. You're also now required to provide that wheelchair charging area that we first talked about. That's required to be in these rooms. They've done some clarifications to the code regarding closets and pantries. They've always had an understanding about when closets are a certain depth that you no longer needed to provide turning space. So in the last few iterations of ANSI, they've been very clear that turning space isn't required when you have a short pantry under 48 inches. They kind of forgot to put in that the door maneuvering clearance is also not required. So that has finally caught up in this code. So when you have a small walk-in closet, you no longer need to provide turning space as always, and now the door maneuvering clearance. And the bathroom footprint is now going to change in these, I believe, in these places to accommodate the larger clearances. In multifamily housing, we also have a requirement to provide type A units. And again, for people in Massachusetts, they're somewhat similar to group 2As, but not really. Group 2As are more stringent in a way. But multifamily housing in other states that use the model building codes, these are some of the changes. I think the first one would apply more to senior living, assisted living units, memory care units. If they have little kitchens in them and there's no cooktop, which there usually isn't, then there's no requirement for a work surface. That was never quite spelled out before. So they modified the code to understand that. Similar to what we just talked about with the pantry, they finally caught up with the no door maneuvering clearance if the pantry or the walk-in closet's small. Wet bar, same thing. If you have a wet bar and a unit, which some, again, the private high-end ones will have the parallel approach. Oh, I meant to write not, there's an error in the slide. There's not a centered parallel approach required. Sorry for that. And the tub seat exception has been removed, which is not, which now means that you must provide a tub seat in a type A unit. It can be removable or permanent, but it is now required. I think the meaning for this might be that it will start to dictate the tub heights in type A units. In Massachusetts, we already know that in a group 2A, you are restricted to a 16 to 18 inch high tub. That's never been the case in ANSI type A units. So I think as this plays out in the states that are adopting it, we'll see this come up more. And lastly, in multifamily housing for type B units, these are the less restricted. The majority of the units on your project are considered type B. They line up somewhat with group 1 in Massachusetts, but not quite. They have different requirements too, but they definitely line up with the Fair Housing Act requirements. So there's much more coordination now and similar use. So whether in new construction, you can still use the existing old clear floor space requirement for everything needed in a type B unit, 30 by 48. Mailboxes, they have finally defined mailboxes, which get to be a sticky area, but all mailboxes for type B can be similar to HUD and fair housing, 54 inches for an unobstructed reach. The accessible route has new exceptions as we've talked about, so that will be different to fair housing, they'll be larger. The operational parts is quite different, and that I'm going to talk about one big part to it in the next slide, but it's got some very nuanced areas around operable parts. So that's definitely pay attention to that when you're designing type B units. Refrigerators can now have a forward approach that's offset. For years, ANSI's allowed a parallel approach to be offset at refrigerators. But now they're allowing the forward approach to be. This is different to fair housing, so be aware of that. They finally provided some clarifications. For years, people call us and ICC asking about shower door clearances. Unlike Massachusetts, which does have a requirement, shower doors have never had a requirement under the ICC ANSI codes. So they finally clarified that they actually spell it out. They finally spelled out showers when they're the only bathing fixture. They've always had their code has always read, if a shower is the only bathing fixture, it must be minimum 36 by minimum 36. Well, most showers have a 30-inch wide, so it's always, they've clarified it in commentary, but never come out in the code and spelled it out. So now it's finally been spelled out for exceptions. You can have alternate exceptions to meet that code. And they've clarified and separated out. I guess there's been some confusion that I wasn't aware of, that clear floor space applies to each laundry appliance. So when you don't have a stacked one, but you have the side by side, it applies to each appliance. And I think the last slide related to is the operable parts. This is of the operable parts and all the exceptions. There's about 8 or 10 in there. This is a significant one for multifamily. They have now acknowledging another exception where you can't provide clear floor space. So they have some parameters around these corner conditions to alleviate being able to provide an outlet there. And I think that's it for the ANSI section of this. So in the next, is there any questions before we just move on very quickly to HUD and the safe harbors that have changed? We good? Okay. So in just the last bit of this, before we turn it over for to John, HUD has periodically, HUD will, let me back up for 1 second that I don't have a slide for. HUD applies to all new construction for multifamily housing. And as we've already alluded to and talked about, it is a civil rights law. It is not a building code. So to meet the design and construction requirements of fair housing, most projects build to a sanctioned safe harbor. So HUD periodically announces what they consider a safe harbor is often one of the ANSI codes. There are some other safe harbors. And if you choose that and design and meet the technical requirements under these ANSI, under these sanctioned safe harbors, your intent is that when you're all said and done, you should have met the requirements for fair housing. So HUD has most recently adopted ANSI 2009, as well as IBC codes 2009, 2012, and 15 and 18 as safe harbors. In the accessibility world, we've been waiting for this for a long time, and it finally has got approved around December or January, and it took effect last week on March 8th. So moving forward in other, it may make sense in other states that already have adopted 2009 as a safe harbor to choose this as your, let me back up, sorry. It may be very efficient to use this ANSI 2009 as your safe harbor when you're building and constructing in states where the IBC building code references ANSI 2009. It's a lot to take in. So very quickly, HUD, to meet fair housing, as I just mentioned, it's design, it's the civil rights law, but that covers so much. But in construction, what we're concerned with is meeting the design and construction requirements of the Fair Housing Act. And so this is just a very brief summary that in general, it applies to new construction, 4 or more units. And then depending on whether you have an elevator or not, will depend on which units apply. And then you don't have to choose a safe harbor, but most projects choose one of the recognized safe harbors to meet the design and construction requirements for Fair Housing Act. And just very quickly, it doesn't apply to certain things like townhouses, carriage house units, and not to alterations. And again, the HUD requirement, I keep saying HUD, the Fair Housing Act requirements are these 7 general things. So they have sanctioned ANSI 2009 as that the technical requirements meet all of these requirements that fair housing asks for. So that's they put a lot of work and effort into sanctioning safe harbors. So if you choose 2009 as your safe harbor, you should meet all these requirements. I think it makes the most sense, as I just mentioned, to use this as your safe harbor in the states that have already adopted ANSI 2009. So a state like North Carolina, for example, has already adopted it. It's part of their building code. And so it would make sense to choose it as your safe harbor. It's one less code to meet. When you're in multifamily housing, you're under multiple codes and they can conflict. So this way you're aligning, you have one code. You're not in a unit wondering whether the toilet center line is 16 or 16 to 18. They're now going to be aligned to say the same thing. There'll be less confusion and less conflict. And I think some of the areas and where it's beneficial is where they line up now is 16 to 18 will be allowed both in common areas and in the dwelling units. Common area sinks now will have a centered parallel approach will be allowed. You can always provide a forward one, but you're no longer required to provide one. Units at the clear floor space can be now offset and not centered on the appliance, which is both beneficial for designing and for the functional use of the appliance. And in type B kitchens, there's finally an acknowledgement similar to fair housing that you can have that counter depth at 25.5 inches. It's always been sort of understood, but it's always still been technically was supposed to meet 24. So there's been so that is some of the advantage to choosing this as the safe harbor. You can still keep your toilets at 18, but they can now be 16 to 18. I think some areas where it's more strict, but in a sense it doesn't matter because you're already having to build it for the local code requirement is the unit entry doors. HUD didn't require maneuvering clearance within the dwelling unit at the entry door, but now under 2009 you would. But you're already building it that way for the state that you happen to be working in. Electric panel doors, electric panel boards need to be within reach range. And common area of unobstructed reach range is lowered to 48 inches. Under fair housing design manual and some of the older safe harbors, you could be up to 54. So that's a change that's more strict, but if you're already designing to meet the building code that's in that state or jurisdiction, it's still an advantage, in my opinion.
Lisa, sorry, just to quickly, sorry to do this, but
No,
I think there's a question here, which is just to back up a little bit. And could you just quickly explain what a safe harbor is?
Yes. So similar, when you have the building codes that you're building to, you need to meet the rules of the building code. And so ANSI is one of the ways, it's the technical requirements for the chapter that deals with accessibility. So that spells out all your technical requirements. Fair housing is a law, a civil rights law. It's not a building code. So and it covers many things. It's anti-discrimination, it's rentals, it's everything. But us as designers and the people who are constructing multifamily housing are concerned with the design and construction part of the Fair Housing Act. And so to meet those technical requirements, you choose a safe harbor, meaning you choose a technical guide to meet all those requirements. So Fair Housing says you must have an accessible route to all these elements. So you choose a safe harbor, you open it up, that safe harbor tells you, oh, you need 36 inches level. It gives you the rules for how to meet the design and construction requirements. I don't know if that's sort of a very simple way to explain it, but.
So, I mean, I've always understood the phrase safe harbor to have a slightly legal meaning. In other words, the idea that you are less likely maybe to be sued if you say, I am applying this code and it is a safe harbor.
And that's the reason most people choose one. If you choose it, you should use it in its entirety. It's a good argument. It's an excellent point. There's no real safe harbor to anything, right? Anyone can sue you,
right? As long as there are lawyers, there will never be.
Exactly. And lawsuits, and again, and I should have mentioned, multifamily housing is the most litigious type of building. It's the one that has the most lawsuits associated with it. So it's a big thing. So, but you're absolutely right. It's somewhat of a guarantee, but not really. There are no guarantees, but you're more likely to win. You're more likely to be understood that your intention was to build this correctly and to build and be accessible.
And sorry, just a quick follow-up, because we had another question that so the question was, how do you meet FHA and 521 CMR, which is kind of a big question, but I guess would the short answer be you do your best by picking one of the safe harbors like ANSI 2009?
It's an interesting concept in Massachusetts. So that's a whole other training, but in short, you always build to the strictest code, but if the strictest code is not meeting 521, you could think about it seeking a variance from the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board as a way to meet both, but you do build to the strictest typically. So.
Okay, sorry about that. You should, sorry to interrupt you right at the end.
No, not at all. I'm done. I know there's John needs to speak, but I'm happy to take questions after, or you can write to me. I think I threw something up there. And we're all learning about this as we're going. This is all new. This is all like cutting edge. So,
right.
But thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lisa. That was fantastic. John is supposed to come on in 10 minutes to do his
in 10 minutes.
update.
Oh, I thought, I was.
Well, that's what I was told, was 1:10.
Yep, you're right.
So we have 10 minutes. So if you're in the audience and you have a question, you can either unmute yourself and just toss it over to Lisa, or you can put it in the chat and I will do my best to verbalize it.
Lisa, this is Drake. Can you go back to the side access to the shower stall? Typically the back dimension is 12 inches from the edge of the opening to the back. There you go. So any one of those, you would typically look for the back of the seat to the back of the wheelchair is normally 12 inches. Am I saying that right?
Oh, I can't point. So from where the gray seat is to the back where the dotted lines are, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know in Massachusetts, we have that code for tubs. Not so much at showers. It's to help align I don't know if I'm answering this right, but for what you're asking, but it's to help align so that you're to give enough room for your wheelchair so that your shoulder and your seat is sort of lined to transfer onto that shower seat. Is that
yeah, I came up with this a while back with Marsha Moz from FDA, and I was doing a set of lockers and shower stalls at one of the universities. And my designer we had a very large opening, and they just aligned the shower stalls so that they were equally sized. And I said, that doesn't look right. So Marsha confirmed for me that the shower opening should be 36 inches from left to right.
Mm-hmm.
And you never want to go bigger and you never want to go less.
Correct.
You explained that if you have the wheelchair can back up behind the gray seat, so that a person in the wheelchair can lean forward and grab the grab bar and pull themselves out of the wheelchair and slide into the seat.
Correct.
And that 12 inches is what gives that flexibility for the person in the wheelchair.
Yes, and I agree with you. But I think they never quite spelled out the 12. They've just so the key element is that clear floor space lines up with the control wall, or now they're giving you an exception to push it the 4 inches to, be able to have some flexibility with the size of the space there.
Okay, so let me make it more complicated.
No.
Because what you had just said earlier is something we all need to be concerned about, and that is with the motorized chairs. because the motorized chairs are requiring all this extra space, I'm trying to, since I'm not in a wheelchair, I'm having to extrapolate from what I see and what I hear in order to better understand how we can meet the requirement for a motorized chair. So I'm trying to think, is would that 12 inches for a manual chair be the equivalent for a motorized chair? So I'm a little confused there.
Can you help me understand the 12 inches that you're referring to? Is it just that extra space beyond the 36 to make the 48?
Yes.
Okay, yep. So that is how it got, one of the reasons and how it got determined where to align it. Sorry, I didn't understand that at first. And so now it's grown to 12 and 16.
So it's 4 inches
It's
more.
grown. Yes, thank you.
So it hasn't really changed for a manual chair.
No,
How
no.
does that affect a motorized chair?
Right. So that chair will actually look a little smaller than the graphic there, but you'll still be able to line up because now if you're still in a manual chair, you have a manual shower chair, which many people do. You would that designer will have just given you extra space back there because this is the requirement now to accommodate any chair, I guess you could look at it that way. The next code coming out is going to have similar bathroom changes, bathtub changes, similar to what you're describing to account for the bathing seat. So you'll see some of that with extra toe clearance allowed in the front and that. So, but they're always changing.
Lisa, can I just throw a few quick ones over to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have come in on the chat. So this one's pretty specific. Edward asks, to clarify regarding electric vehicle parking space dimensions, I assume that this is to accommodate an individual with mobility limitations that would like to recharge their EV at a public charging station, not to designate the charging station as accessible only.
So right now, there is not unless there's an ordinance by your city, or I think the MBTA has some requirements, there is not a requirement to provide an accessible EV parking space, but there is a requirement once you provide EV charging spaces, to provide at minimum an accessible route to the charging station. The parking space itself next to it does not need to be an accessible parking, but you do need an accessible route to it. And some other things, the controls and all that. Did that answer the?
I think maybe what he's asking though is if that accessible route to the charging station exists, does that mean that someone who is not mobility limited could still use the charging?
Oh, yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then another question about 521 CMR versus A117.1. Eric asked, would you recommend that those of us designing in Massachusetts remain blissfully ignorant of A117.1 2017, or should we get ahead of the curve and design to it where it is more stringent than 521 CMR and or our chosen safe harbor?
In my opinion, I wouldn't worry about 2017 if you think you're never going to be designing outside of Massachusetts, because I can't imagine it will ever replace 521 CMR. And at this point, it will be it's taken since 2009 to get 2009 as a safe harbor in 2021. So if that's any indication of when they might ever adopt 2017 as a safe harbor, it's a long way off. I can't even imagine. So no, I don't think you need to worry about it. So
great. And then finally, a question from Ruth. What is the timeline for the promulgation of the new regs? I presume she means
521 CMR.
No, I'm sorry. I think she means ANSI A117.1. Does it depend on states' adoption?
Yeah, it's completely states' adoption. I don't know the history of why it was not adopted under 2018, because if it had been, you'd see it much more prevalent by now. But it was not. I don't know if it's getting adopted in the 2021 version of IBC. I've not heard that yet. I haven't dug for it. So right now it's just state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I did hear a rumor that Denver's going to start using it. I didn't see it come out in this January. I thought it would have for anybody that works out in Colorado.
So
So
is that,
right-
and is that something, and individual cities have been
Yes.
adopting it?
Yes, exactly. So that's why in Tennessee, there's certain states that allow all their, like Maryland does this, their local counties can adopt something different to the state, and Texas does the same, and so does Tennessee. So that you kind of always have to check your jurisdiction where your project's going to be as well. It's not
Right.
enough to just know the state code doesn't do it. It's,
Yeah.
but in
a
South Carolina, yeah.
As a Marylander, I can confirm there's a very
Yeah.
high level of sort of county
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. And so you'll see that Massachusetts, not that way. Massachusetts is the state code, covers the whole state, and that's it, you know, so.
And then I just, maybe to follow up on that, Kirk asked, do you know which states have adopted a 117.1? Can you name check a few more places?
But right now, the only place I'm aware of is South Carolina, and there's quite a lot of building going on there, so I might add. And they've adopted it. It's not even new for them. They adopted it over a year ago at this point. Might have been almost 2 years ago. And like I said, I know of Denver, perhaps I heard, but as of this January, which is normally when the turnover is, it hasn't. And right now it's, I'm hearing rumors on other places, but I haven't seen anything come out yet.
And
I was
sorry,
hoping somebody would tell me.
and just to clarify, the South Carolina, have they've adopted 2017 or 2009?
They adopted IBC 2018 and amended it to include ANSI 2017, which is pretty amazing. And it's the entire state. So.
Great.
If I can add something to that.
Yeah.
Every state in the country gets to adopt whatever edition of the ICC they want or have their own codes. The ICC for Chapter 11, which is accessibility, they keep that separate from the building code so that states can adopt their own unique regulations. ANSI 2017 and some of the other versions are somewhat controversial. And so the states are still debating what to do with it. I think in Massachusetts, the reason why our code is statewide is because the state legislature back in 1972 was confronted with a real problem with having 370 building codes. So if you wanted to build somewhere in Massachusetts, you better know the local code basically down to the street. And that was so confusing that the legislature got rid of all of that and required that everybody uses one state building code. And they also prohibit any local jurisdiction from deviating from that by taking something out or adding something in. The one exception to that is the energy code, where we have the the option for local jurisdictions.
Yes, that and so actually, I thank you, Drake. I'm gonna pick up on that and use that as a segue to introduce John Nanari, who's joined us for a regulatory and legislative update. So, John, if you want to unmute yourself and come in, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So I'll jump in on this. I'll give you the quick regulatory legislative / update, which actually pertains to some of this and pertains to exactly what Drake just mentioned. So probably the biggest update as it relates at least to the stretch code, as Drake just mentioned, is we have a climate bill that most of you heard me talk about over the months. It is probably about 3 or 4 weeks away from being signed. The Senate has passed it. The House will vote on it tomorrow. Excuse me, it'll go on to the governor's desk. He will take his 10 days to either sign it or veto it. Likely he will sign, but even if he does veto it, there are more than enough votes to override his veto. So I would be planning for anywhere towards the end of this month, beginning of this April, for the climate change bill to be signed into law. And why you may care about that is we, as AI Mass, were successful in getting some provisions into that bill, specifically a requirement as it relates to the stretch energy code, that the stretch energy code will now include net zero building performance standards in the stretch energy code. So that will be a wonderful win. Unfortunately, though, the legislature also enacted language that now will make the stretch energy code 100% optional for all cities and towns. So those that have been designated as a green community will not lose their green community designation if they choose not to use the stretch energy code. What all this will mean, we don't know. The Department of Energy Resources, who's going to now be in control of writing the stretch energy code and, more importantly, promulgating it. So the BBRS will no longer have any say, really, over the stretch energy code development. It will all be handled by the Department of Energy Resources, and it will be the Department of Energy Resources that it will have to put some guidance together for design professionals, cities and towns and others to figure out what to do about the stretch energy code, specifically towns that have adopted it but decide that they don't want to comply with it anymore. Again, those towns won't lose their green community designation, but they are no longer required to have to comply with the stretch energy code. So that's probably the biggest news. As it relates to the building code, the BBRS has been meeting. They have accepted the schedule that we had put together as a draft for them. And that schedule says we will have a 10th edition of the state building code somewhere around the fall of 2022, early winter of 2022. They are moving forward on that time frame. At the last meeting, they began their review of chapter 3, 4, 5, and 6. They actually only did 3, 4, and 6 because chapter 5 is just so big. But they did agree that they, going forward, are going to have to hold monthly meetings and maybe even interim meetings, because some of the chapters, like chapter 5, are so long, it will take 2 to 3 hours just to go through all the various changes from the 2015 code to the 2018 code, which we jumped over, and then the 2018 to the 2021, not to mention the mass amendments. So it is all in progress. It is all moving forward. That's really the big update, if you will, on code-related matters. One matter that I do want to put forward as a question to this group is related to now that the $1.9 billion stimulus has been approved by Congress, and clearly Massachusetts has about, I think my last look was somewhere around $8 billion coming to the state for a variety of different things. And a big slug of that money will go to cities and towns, and more specifically their schools, to do upgrades for mechanical systems as it relates to COVID. One question that I do have for this group is related to that, and it's just a concern that I have. Maybe it's not, but I'll put out the example and let others discuss it and tell me whether I have anything to be concerned about, or we have anything to be concerned about or not. So I'm looking at, for instance, I live in the town of Holliston. And so I looked up the assessed value of the Holliston High School, which would likely be one of the buildings that would have to get a mechanical system upgrade. And the building is assessed at about $15.9 million. And per what the MAB requirements state, that I would then take that $15.9 million and I would multiply that, or I'm sorry, I would divide that by the assessment ratio, which was assigned by the state of 0.94. So when I divide that, I get an equalized or assessed value of the building, which is about $16.9 million. 30% of that is approximately $5 million. So in other words, the $5 million is the threshold by which I may have to bring that building up to full accessibility compliance. Now, the 521 very clearly states that mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems are part of the exemptions, but it says that they are part of the exemptions or the alteration work, which is limited solely to electrical, mechanical, or plumbing, and does not involve the alteration of any elements or spaces required to be accessible under 521. So in other words, if I'm going into this building to update mechanical systems, I may have to tear out ceiling systems in hallways, or wall systems in hallways, or even walls or roofs or ceiling systems in some of the classrooms, which clearly are spaces that are accessible. And so, as one might imagine with mechanical systems, they are not cheap. And I would very easily hit a $5 million threshold on most high school renovation projects of their mechanical systems. So my question to the group is my basic read of this seem to be on track? And if so, do we as AIA need to start talking to whomever in the state? It's not clear to me yet who would be in charge of this, but do we need to start having conversations about what we, I think, don't want are cities and towns who are looking to do renovation work to their school stock, and the very first step that they have to take is going to the MAB to get a variance. So I put that out there as a question for the group, because my read of this at the moment is we may end up having cities and towns approaching the MAB for variance requirements just to do mechanical systems upgrades in their schools, because likely they will hit that 30% trigger. I'm hoping you will tell me that I'm totally off on this and that it's not an issue, but I put it out for the group. I think I saw Ed's got his hand up.
Good afternoon, John. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, also. This is very, very helpful guidance. John, you and I have talked about this more than once over a pretty long period of time. And my understanding, and I hope I'm wrong, but my understanding is that those 5 exempted categories, in essence, are the exemptions from the accessible entry, not the 30% calculation. So that if someone were to spend 30% or more of the replacement value, then the building would need to be fully accessible as if it were new, unless a variance were granted. It sounds like under the circumstances that a new mechanical system to deal with a pandemic would be something that does not involve accessible routes or circulation, or is strictly limited to the mechanical system. I'd like to think that the access board would grant a variance, but my understanding, and I'll defer to others, is that it would probably be necessary. I don't like that. I think the code should be changed so that those 5 exempted categories are really exempt, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. That's my take on it. And what I'm my concern is that, the whole point of doing all these mechanical system upgrades is as a result of COVID and wanting to get these things done sooner rather than later. And my concern would be having 351 cities and towns, or some portion of that, as their very first step going to get a variance from the MAB. Not to say that that's improper, but maybe the conversation with MAB is putting out some type of guidance that calls for an exemption specifically as it relates to these COVID type of upgrades. This is coming off the top of my head, but what I wanted to do is just to see if anybody else sees this as the same concern that I'm starting to see it as, and obviously it would require AIA to take some action here in the state. But I'm not glad to hear it, but I'm glad to hear, Ed, that you're reading it the same way that I am. I'm curious just to hear what others have to say about that, if anything. I guess not.
I agree. I think it's going to be a problem.
Okay. Thank you, Kurt. Okay. Well, there's no resolve to this. It's something that I'll certainly talk with my board. I know my board president is on the call right now, so it's something we can talk about a little later to see if we can help smooth this process out. But again, it was really just a question to see if others were seeing sort of the same concern.
John and Ed, is the concern then that what we want to do is limit this seeking of variances just to the COVID options, to doing repairs, to respond to the pandemic? Or is it for MEP work, regardless of if it's of the pandemic or any other problem? If we need to upgrade MEP systems, having done some school work, I can say that you have to work very hard to not disrupt corridors or walls or ceilings. And so you can quickly, especially when you deal with a fairly large school, you can run that bill up very quickly. So I think the issue is as broad as basically any school or any MEP work for whatever purpose.
Yeah, all I was thinking more specifically was, again, the federal money that's coming down, as I understand it, at least the money that's coming from the feds to cities and towns to spend in their schools is money that is directly related to COVID. Doing whatever upgrades you need specifically to mechanical systems as it relates to protecting our children from COVID. So in the example that I've put forward, if we were going to talk to the MAB or anyone else, I think that what we would be asking for is not all mechanical system upgrades, but mechanical system upgrades that are specific to the federal dollars that are coming down to give cities and towns the resources to address the COVID-19 issues. Not, the city or town just decided on their own, regardless, we were going to upgrade our mechanical systems in the school because they're 30 years old and we just decided to do that. That's different. That I would say, yeah, if the trigger is met in that situation, then yes, you should go to the MAB and ask for a variance. But in the instance of COVID, and given that I suspect there's going to be a lot of the majority of the communities in this state are going to be taking advantage of that money and trying to spend it very quickly, because I suspect it's going to come with time limits in terms of how quick, when the money can be spent, that you don't want to lose time. Cities and towns are not going to want to lose their time in getting in front of the MAB to ask for a variance, especially if we have 351 cities and towns and 200 of them all of a sudden are asking for variances. That is going to put a serious backlog onto the MAB.
John, speaking of the MAB and Lisa as well, the questions come in that I think would be great to have both of you answer. David Pollack asks, what's happening with updating 521 CMR, which is now 25 years since significant rewrite? MAAB circulated a red line a couple years ago, but I'm not aware of where it stands today.
What I can say, which is what I've said in the past, is my understanding is that the Baker administration is not going to allow any of the changes that have been proposed to the 521 until the MAAB actually addresses the 30% threshold issue. And that's mainly because of the inequity of that 30% when you apply it across the state. So 30% of a building out in Western Mass versus 30% of a building in Eastern Mass, the building values, the assessed values obviously are much lower out on the eastern portion of the state than they are on the western portion of the state. And you'll hit that 30% trigger much quicker in the in the western portion of the state versus the eastern portion. And so that's been my understanding, that they have said to them, until you resolve that, we're not going to allow any of the rest of the regs to move forward. And my understanding is that the MAB has not had any interest in making any of those changes. So that I think the thought was wait until another administration comes in who may be more open to not having a concern about the 30% threshold. I haven't heard anything different, and that's been out there for a while. Lisa, I don't know if you've heard anything different.
I have not heard any different, unfortunately. So, and John, I wanted to just mention, I don't know, and I'm not trying to simplify your task with the COVID MEPs, but I'm wondering if the board in the past, and I know the board changes, has been open to memos of MOUs. Memos of understanding very specifically to certain things. So I'm wondering if that, because I agree. I mean, I can't imagine the clog on the system. Yeah. So
I think that's
a way to approach, at least historically, and a way to approach. Yeah.
exactly, because, you know, again, my point of asking the question is not to be the fly in the ointment. It's to say maybe we can position the architectural community to actually help the state get this enacted quicker, or not quicker, but in the way that it was actually intended.
Well, yeah, and it's time sensitive with COVID, and yeah,
exactly. So, you know, and I if they're open to an MOU, that'd be wonderful. Or even if it was just simple guidance to cities and towns saying, hey, we know this is coming, and, you know, you don't need to come if it's truly COVID related. You do not need to, you know, and you've hit the trigger. Understand you don't need to come to us for that, or, you know, whatever, however they might phrase something like that.
right.
Obviously, the legal counsel would have to get involved, but I just think now, since the money hasn't come yet, but it will be coming very soon, and these questions will start rising, I think there's an opportunity for us to help the state.
John, if I might, the monies that we get in the state, when they're available, we like to put toward the schools. I hope Edward will agree. This last year, the state revenues were not down, if I understood correctly. They were significantly up above what was anticipated. So, if you will, I would think of that as kind of a windfall. Now, there are two big areas, maybe 3 or 4, where I can see that the legislature would like to put money. And I would think that one of them is going to be for schools. So the issue of monies becoming available, there are a lot of schools that need work. If that money was available across the state, I can see some of the schools wanting to start doing projects, if for nothing else, and to upgrade their systems, regardless of COVID. This issue of the equity or inequity of the 30% threshold is going to come up again. So whether it's for COVID or for any other purpose, the conflict of property values across the state is just going to keep coming up and again. And unless somebody wants to do a complete replacement, spending money is going to be put off if they don't want to replace the building, because they don't want to have to get into the added expense of dealing with stuff that isn't part of their intent. And I'll stop there.
I agree. I had a separate question for Lisa and others as it related to the A117, the new A117 standard. What is the advice as it relates to non-housing commercial projects? So if you're in the IBC and you're just, again, a non-housing project, maybe it's a school or an office tower, do any of the A117 standards apply? And what is the interplay between the A117 and our existing MAB? So now we have the new A117 standards, but we still have the existing MAB. Should we be picking one or over the other?
Yeah, no, I'd explain that at the beginning, John, so I'm sorry, but this is specific. No, but it's specific to projects that you're building outside of Massachusetts. So when you're, and specific to states and jurisdictions that have adopted the 2017.
Okay.
So, and it will become more and more, IBC 2018 did not take it on as the reference code. And that's the reason we're not seeing so much of it, but it's I'm assuming 2021 will take it on.
And we will be adopting the 2021. That will be the basis of our 10th edition.
Yeah, but I'm sure they'll still take out chapter 11 for.
Oh yeah.
So it's more in the states where it's relevant and the jurisdictions right now where it's relevant. But it's interesting. I think moving forward for ANSI codes, again, where sorry, my hands are flying, but where the Massachusetts states, you're just going to keep seeing things getting bigger and bigger to accommodate the power chairs and things. So,
sure. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Great. So this has been great. Thanks to everyone. We're a little bit past 1:30, so I am going to click stop on the recording. And